They laughed. Loud, careless laughter that filled the room, bouncing off the walls like it had been rehearsed just for him. Ozzy Osbourne, the man they once worshipped as the god of rock, walked in, and somehow, in their eyes, he had fallen. A joke, a relic of a bygone era, someone whose fame and fortune had supposedly dried up like a forgotten puddle under the scorching sun. "Looks like Ozzy can't even buy a coffee anymore," one of them whispered, barely trying to keep it quiet. Others snorted in agreement, smirking at their own cleverness. They thought the old rocker was broke, irrelevant, a shadow of the legend whose name once sent shivers down stages worldwide. But Ozzy didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't even raise an eyebrow, at least not yet. He simply walked, each step deliberate, each movement calm, measured. The room's laughter grew louder, sharper, a knife aimed at his pride. They expected his shoulders to slump, his eyes to dart nervously, maybe even a nervous chuckle, as he realized the world had moved on. But Ozzy had never been predictable. They didn't know the man sitting before them could crush them with a single sentence. They didn't know that silence, patience, and subtle observation were more powerful weapons than the loudest roar of mockery. While they were busy counting his supposed failures, Ozzy was already calculating the perfect strike. He let their laughter wash over him, pretending to be invisible, letting them feel their dominance, the illusion of power. They leaned in, thinking he was intimidated, thinking victory was theirs. Every smirk, every snicker, every condescending glance only sharpened the anticipation of what was about to come. Because they had forgotten one thing: legends never truly fall. They only wait. They watch. They listen. And when the time is right, they strike back. Ozzy's eyes scanned the room casually, taking in every sneer, every whisper, every dismissive gesture. And then, just as their laughter reached its peak, he paused, looked at them, and delivered a single sentence. One sentence. One carefully chosen sentence that would instantly flip the entire room upside down. And in that moment, the joke wasn't on him anymore. It was on them. This wasn't the start of an argument. This wasn't a simple rebuttal. This was the beginning of a lesson in humility, one that they would never forget. Ozzy Osbourne. Just hearing the name was enough to make people pause, to make them reconsider who they were and what they thought they knew. Rock's Prince of Darkness, the man who had defined generations with his voice, his presence, and a fearless attitude that made him untouchable. To the world, he was larger than life. A legend whose every note, every scream, every performance left fans and critics alike in awe. But today, in this small, cramped room full of doubters, he wasn't just a legend, he was a man. And they thought that made him vulnerable. The irony was delicious. Ozzy had walked into the room with the casual air of someone who had nothing to prove. His leather jacket creaked slightly with each step, a reminder that he had been here before, that he had survived storms much worse than a few sneers from people who would soon wish they hadn't opened their mouths. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need flashy entrances. Legends never do. The power wasn't in theatrics, it was in presence. And Ozzy had it in spades. They didn't know what they were up against. They had seen the wrinkled face of a man whose hair had silvered, whose tattoos had faded, whose body had endured decades of stage fights, wild tours, and excess. They thought that the glory days were behind him. They thought he had nothing left to fight for. But Ozzy's power wasn't measured in fame or fortune. It was in intelligence, patience, and timing. That single sentence he had been holding in reserve, the one that would make them choke on their laughter, had been years in the making. He had seen this before. People who mistook silence for weakness. People who believed the world owed them respect simply for daring to speak louder. Ozzy's experience had taught him differently. Power, real power, wasn't something you claimed. It was something you demonstrated, slowly, deliberately, and without mercy. And as he scanned the room, taking in their smug faces, their assumptions, their misplaced confidence, he felt that quiet thrill of inevitability. The moment was coming, and they wouldn't even see it until it hit. Every legend has a moment where they decide what kind of legacy they will leave behind. For Ozzy, it wasn't about proving fame or flaunting wealth. It was about respect. It was about teaching a lesson in humility to those who thought they were clever. They would learn, as they always did, that underestimating a legend is a mistake you only make once. He let the whispers continue, He let the laughter roll, subtle and biting. He leaned against the wall, a picture of calm control. His eyes, sharp and calculating, missed nothing. The sideways glances, the subtle gestures of superiority, the barely concealed smirks. Every detail would become ammunition in the moment of truth. And deep down, he relished it. Not out of malice, but out of justice. They were about to learn the cost of arrogance. Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just a name. He wasn't just a rock star. He was a force, quiet, controlled, and lethal in his precision. And in this room of doubters, in this room of smug laughter, that force was about to make itself known. Because legends don't rise from glory, they endure it, master it, and strike when the timing is perfect. And Ozzy, he had waited a long time for this one perfect moment. The room had grown louder, or maybe it was just the sound of their own confidence echoing in their ears. Ozzy Osbourne stood there, quiet, almost statuesque, but every ounce of him radiated control. The group of critics, doubters, and wannabe big shots hadn't held back. They had been planning this little moment of superiority for weeks, thinking they were orchestrating an unavoidable humiliation. "He looks old," one had whispered. "Probably barely has 2 pennies to rub together." Another had snorted. "He's just a has-been now. What could he possibly do for anyone anymore?" They didn't notice the slight curl at the corner of Ozzy's mouth. They didn't notice the sharp glint in his eyes, subtle but deadly. They didn't see the calculation behind the calm. Because Ozzy had seen this before. He had walked into rooms like this hundreds of times, faced people who underestimated him, who mocked him, who thought they were clever enough to strip him of his legend with a few careless words, and he had never failed. The laughter continued. Louder now, more vicious, a rising tide of misplaced arrogance. They leaned forward in their seats, enjoying the illusion that they had the upper hand. They whispered to each other, exchanged smirks, and even joked out loud. "Should we ask him for spare change?" one said, barely holding back a laugh. Another nodded. "Maybe he'll sign a napkin for us if he can even afford paper." Ozzy didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a single move that would betray irritation. To the untrained eye, he seemed passive, almost disinterested. But inside, every cell of his body was alive with anticipation. Every insult, every mocking glance, every tiny gesture of disrespect was being catalogued, stored, and weighed. He wasn't going to respond impulsively. He was going to dismantle them with precision. The irony was exquisite. The same men who thought they were sharp, who thought they were in control, were completely blind to the storm sitting silently in the room. They didn't know that patience could be more brutal than anger. They didn't know that listening, waiting, and choosing the perfect moment could be more dangerous than yelling or retaliating immediately. And most importantly, they didn't know the weight behind a single sentence from a man who had seen it all. Ozzy took a slow step forward, and the room seemed to shrink around him. Their laughter faltered slightly as they noticed the subtle shift in energy, but still, they underestimated him. They still thought he was vulnerable, still thought they had the leverage, and in that underestimation lay their fatal mistake. He could feel it. The anticipation building, the invisible tension crackling like electricity. Every chuckle, every sideways glance, every whispered insult had only sharpened the impact that was coming. They thought they were exposing weakness. They thought they were winning. But in truth, they were walking straight into a trap. A trap crafted carefully, patiently, and with lethal precision. Ozzy glanced around once more, as if confirming what he already knew. They had all revealed themselves: arrogance, ignorance, overconfidence. Every fault they displayed would soon be highlighted by the sheer force of reality. One sentence, that's all it would take. And when it landed, the laughter would die instantly, replaced by shock, disbelief, and the bitter taste of humility. Because legends don't fight on their own terms. They wait for the perfect opportunity. They don't need to prove anything in the moment. They strike with timing so precise that the outcome is unavoidable. And Ozzy, he had been waiting, watching, calculating. The room was theirs for the moment, but only for the moment. Soon, it would belong to him. And when it did, there would be no arguing, no comeback, no second chances, only the undeniable truth. Underestimating a legend is the first mistake you make. The last mistake comes in the form of one single, devastating sentence. The air in the room had changed. What had started as laughter, a chorus of sneers and mockery, was now tinged with something heavier. Something they didn't yet recognize. Ozzy Osbourne didn't speak. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make any dramatic gesture. He simply existed in the space, and the weight of his presence began to press down on the room. Subtle but undeniable. They were still laughing, still whispering, still confident in their superiority. But now, something was off. There was a quiet in their minds they couldn't shake. A faint unease that perhaps this man they were mocking had more power than they realized. They didn't know it yet, but they were sitting on a volcano, and Ozzy was the calm before the eruption. Ozzy let them continue. Every laugh, every glance, every joke aimed at him became fuel, sharpening the anticipation. He observed silently, like a predator circling its prey, taking note of every detail. The way they leaned forward when they thought they were clever. The way their eyes darted to one another when they tried to confirm their own superiority. The smug confidence in their posture. The arrogance that had been their armor. All of it was visible to him, all of it recorded. He didn't need to respond immediately. That was the point. Legends don't act when provoked. They act when the moment is perfect, and the moment was nearly here. Every second of delay, every beat of silence, was bringing him closer to the point where their laughter would be extinguished in a single, unforgettable blow. Their underestimation was exquisite. They thought he would stumble, thought he would falter, thought he would react with embarrassment or fear. But Ozzy wasn't that kind of man. He had survived decades of chaos, excess, and the scrutiny of millions. He had faced critics far crueler than these, and yet, here he was, still standing, still calculating, still untouchable. He shifted slightly, just enough to catch their attention, but not enough to reveal his hand. The room leaned in subconsciously, sensing that something was coming, though they couldn't place it. Their confidence, once loud and boisterous, began to waver, tiny cracks forming in the walls of their arrogance. But still, they didn't know how close the storm had already arrived. Ozzy's eyes scanned the room with precision. Each flick of an eyelid, each subtle movement, each attempt to provoke him, was catalogued, weighed, and filed for the perfect moment of execution. He was patient. He was calm. He was lethal in his patience, and as their laughter reached its peak, it was clear. They were ripe for the strike. He could feel the tension building inside him, but it was controlled. He didn't rush. He didn't overplay. The silence between words, the pauses, the delay. They all mattered. It was all part of the preparation. Every mocking comment they made, every sneer, every sideways glance, added to the weight of the moment, made the impact of what he was about to say even more devastating. And then, just before he spoke, just before the room would experience the full force of his calculated power, he paused. A single breath, slow and deliberate, as if the world itself was holding its attention. The laughter in the room faltered. The whispers slowed. A tiny shiver ran through the crowd, though no one understood why. Because legends, Ozzy Osbourne included, don't reveal their strength too early. They wait, they watch, they let their adversaries dig their own graves with words, confidence, and arrogance. And now, the moment had arrived. The sentence that would crush their illusions, shatter their smug superiority, and prove once and for all that underestimating a legend is a mistake you only make once. The room leaned forward instinctively, a collective breath held in anticipation. The time for silence was over. The moment of reckoning had come, and in just a few words, Ozzy Osbourne would flip the room upside down, leaving no doubt. He was untouchable, unstoppable, and far more powerful than anyone in that room had imagined. The room had grown unbearably quiet, though no one wanted to admit it. Every mocking smile, every whispered joke, every sneer, everything that had built the illusion of superiority, had evaporated into tension. The laughter that had dominated moments ago now felt fragile, like the last sparks of a dying fire. And at the center of it all stood Ozzy Osbourne, calm, composed, and lethal in his patience. He had watched them, observed every twitch, every glance, every attempt to assert dominance. And now, after minutes that felt like hours, the moment had arrived. His eyes scanned the room one last time, absorbing every ounce of arrogance, every trace of smugness, every subtle display of misplaced confidence. They didn't know it yet, but all of it. Their hubris, their mockery, had just set the stage for the moment that would crush them entirely. Then he spoke. Not a shout, not a roar, not even a dramatic build-up. Just words. Simple, precise, devastating in their economy. I bought the company your parents work for. It was almost anticlimactic in its delivery. Almost. But the effect was instantaneous. The room froze. Faces that had been smug a second ago contorted into disbelief, shock, and finally the slow, bitter taste of humiliation. Eyes widened, jaws slackened, and whispers turned into stunned silence. They had expected an argument, a rebuttal, perhaps even a sarcastic joke, but nothing could have prepared them for this. The sentence hung in the air, weighty and unstoppable. The arrogance that had filled the room just moments before seemed absurd now. Every smirk, every glance, every condescending laugh now carried the bitter sting of regret. They had laughed at a legend, and in return, the legend had destroyed the illusion of power they had clung to so desperately. Ozzy didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to elaborate. The impact of a single, perfectly timed statement did all the work. The room shifted uncomfortably. People exchanging glances as if silently asking, "Did he just say what I think he said?" Every whisper of mockery, every attempt to diminish him, had been perfectly flipped back onto them. And as the silence stretched, Ozzy allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Not a grin of malice, but one of calm inevitability. Justice, subtle but absolute, had been served. Legends, he knew, didn't need to fight physically, or shout, or storm into rage. Legends acted with patience, observation, and timing. And today, this room full of doubters had learned a lesson they would never forget. Slowly, the murmurs began to rise, but too late. The damage had been done. Every attempt to recover, every explanation they might try to offer, fell flat against the undeniable truth. They had underestimated Ozzy Osbourne, and he had dismantled them with a single line. The power dynamics of the room had shifted irrevocably. The laughter that had once emboldened them now seemed absurd, like the echo of a foolish dream. Ozzy turned slightly, letting his presence dominate without a word. The tension in the room was palpable. Every person there knew they had been outclassed, outmaneuvered, and outsmarted. And yet, he remained calm, composed, untouchable. The embodiment of the fact that true power is often quiet, controlled, and invisible until it strikes. No one dared interrupt. No one dared challenge. The room had learned the hard truth. Underestimating a legend isn't just foolish, it's dangerous. And Ozzy Osbourne had proven, once again, that legends don't need theatrics. They don't need threats. One perfectly timed sentence is all it takes to command respect, to assert dominance, and to remind the world why they are untouchable. By the time he walked out, leaving the stunned audience behind, the lesson had been carved into their minds. Confidence is fragile. Arrogance is deadly. And underestimating a legend, that is a mistake with no redemption. Ozzy had struck, and the room would never forget it. The room was silent. Truly silent. Not the kind of quiet that comes naturally, but the kind that presses against your ears, heavy and suffocating. Every whispered insult, every mocking glance, every sarcastic comment that had filled the air just moments ago now seemed absurd. The smug arrogance that had once given them confidence was gone, replaced by disbelief and, slowly, the bitter taste of humiliation. They couldn't look at him the same way. Ozzy Osbourne, rock legend, untouchable, calm, composed, had just demolished their illusions with a single sentence. They had thought they were clever, that they were in control. They had thought the man standing before them was vulnerable, fragile, a relic of the past, and now, they realized how wrong they had been. Some stared at him, wide-eyed, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Some whispered to each other, their words trembling with shock. "Did he really?" One finally dared to say, voice almost inaudible. The others nodded, faces pale, eyes avoiding direct contact, as if acknowledging the undeniable truth would make it burn their own pride. Ozzy didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone said it all. He had won. Not with violence, not with anger, not with theatrics, but with patience, precision, and the quiet power of timing. The lesson was clear. Arrogance, mockery, and underestimation of a true legend came with a cost. A heavy, inescapable cost. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. Each second allowed the reality of what had happened to sink in. The room had been his battlefield, and without raising a hand, he had claimed victory. Their laughter, their confidence, their sense of superiority. All gone, reduced to nothing more than foolish pride scattered in the wake of his dominance. And then the subtle acknowledgments began. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, almost imperceptible. A nod here, a glance there, a shift in posture that betrayed respect, and perhaps fear. They couldn't admit it openly. Not yet. But they knew. They all knew. Ozzy Osbourne had not just defended himself. He had shown them what true power looked like. It wasn't about money, fame, or theatrics. It was about control, patience, and the ability to strike when the time was perfect. Some tried to recover to save face, but it was useless. Every word they had planned to defend their arrogance now felt hollow. Every joke they had made to diminish him now felt foolish. The realization settled in like a stone in their stomachs. They had been outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and outclassed by a man they had thought was broken, irrelevant, and weak. Ozzy turned. Slow, deliberate, every movement calm, controlled. He didn't gloat. He didn't mock. He simply walked out, leaving the room behind, leaving his lesson behind. And in that silence, in that stillness, the power of his presence lingered. Every person in that room would carry it with them. The knowledge that a true legend's strength doesn't come from loud words or flashy displays, but from the quiet, unstoppable force of patience, precision, and undeniable skill. By the time the door closed behind him, the room was forever changed. No laughter would return. No arrogance would dare rise again. The lesson had been delivered. The message was clear: underestimate a legend, and you pay the price. And the echo of Ozzy Osbourne's dominance would resonate in their minds long after he had left. The echoes of what had just happened still lingered in the room. Silence hung like a thick fog, pressing against every person present. They had entered full of confidence, full of arrogance, ready to mock, ready to dominate. They had thought Ozzy Osbourne, the man they once called a legend, was broken, irrelevant, and powerless. They had been wrong. Catastrophically, undeniably wrong. For a moment, the room seemed to pause in time. The impact of a single sentence had rippled through every corner, every thought, every assumption. It wasn't just the shock of what he said, it was the precision, the timing, the calm inevitability behind it. Ozzy had taught them a lesson that no argument, no confrontation, no attempt at rebuttal could ever erase. Underestimating a legend wasn't just foolish, it was dangerous. And yet, Ozzy didn't linger. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Legends don't require validation. Legends don't need applause. The power of a true legend is quiet, unshakable, and evident in the aftermath of their actions. As he left the room, each step measured and deliberate, he left behind more than silence. He left behind a lesson, a warning, a truth that would resonate long after the echoes of laughter and whispers had faded. They would carry it with them, the memory of being outsmarted, outclassed, and utterly humbled by a man they had assumed was powerless. They would recall the shock in their own eyes, the taste of disbelief in their mouths, the bitter realization that arrogance, confidence without awareness, and mockery aimed at the wrong person could unravel everything in an instant. This was more than just revenge. This was mastery, control, timing, and most importantly, it was a reminder that legends are never truly defined by wealth, fame, or appearances. They are defined by presence, strategy, and the ability to command respect without raising a hand. For the world watching or reading this story, the takeaway was simple. Never underestimate someone who has lived, survived, and conquered far beyond what you can imagine. People like Ozzy Osbourne don't just exist. They endure, they wait, they observe, and when the moment is right, they strike in a way that leaves no room for denial, no space for arrogance, no question of power. The room may have recovered its chatter eventually. Some may have tried to brush off the embarrassment. Some may have laughed nervously, pretending it never happened. But deep down, they all knew. The lesson was embedded. The strike had landed, and the memory would linger. Every conversation they had from that day forward, every decision, every claim of superiority. They would recall the moment Ozzy Osbourne, calm, quiet, and unassuming, demonstrated what it truly meant to be untouchable. And that is why legends are feared, respected, and remembered. Not because they boast, not because they rage, not because they show off. They are feared because their power is calculated, precise, and devastating. They are remembered because they can deliver justice in a way that lingers long after the act itself. So share this story. Tell it. Let it be a reminder that arrogance is fragile, confidence can crumble, and underestimating a legend is a mistake that leaves a mark. One sentence, one perfectly timed action, can change everything. And in the end, that is the power of a true legend like Ozzy Osbourne. Untouchable, unstoppable, unforgettable. Because legends never fade, they endure, they strike, and they leave the world, and those who doubt them forever changed.